Growing up, I was raised from a Christian home. My father, he is a minister for Native American churches in Oklahoma. Pretty much, if you're not familiar with the language, it can be a little difficult to understand, because most of the ministers now, they still use Native language. My parents made it a point to try to break the language down for me to where I could understand, which, I loved, because it's a different atmosphere. The church is. At an early age, I started to deal with a lot of loss in my life. At the age of 6, I was molested by a neighbor. Never told anybody. So from then, I became what is known as a bottler. Bottled all my emotions up, didn't discuss it with anybody. I lost my sister at a young age, who a sister obviously is supposed to be your lifelong friend. On July 30th, 1995, my 10th birthday, I made the decision to accept Christ into my life. I was baptized by my dad, and I can still remember the look on his face, how happy he was to actually see one of his kids coming to know the Lord. And for a few years, I focused my life on the Lord. I would do fellowship with my father after school. We would talk about different things. But when I turned 13, I suffered a really traumatic loss in my life. My aunt, who pretty much raised me as a kid, passed away. And at that time, it scared a lot of my family, because they wondered how I was going to adjust to not having her around. I thought I was okay, but it falls back to where I bottled everything up. Just a few short months after she passed away, I started using marijuana at the age of 13. Very young, I started, noticing how my older cousins were acting and what they were doing, so I started to fall in to their lifestyle. I hid it from everybody for several years. The only people that really knew about it were my cousins, who I participated with. And during this time, I started to become angry and bitter, and I had a lot of resentment. And not only towards God, but towards my parents as well. At the age of 16, I started using alcohol. And literally by the time I hit age 18, I was a full-blown alcoholic. I graduated high school, left for college, and only finished one semester because the partying lifestyle got the best of me. I made the decision after a semester to come home. I moved back in with my parents. Couldn't take it anymore because they had their rules. Curfew, if you're going to live here, this is what you're going to have to do. I didn't like it, so I ventured out on my own again. And that was a big turning point. Every day was always something new. It was a party of some sort, whether it was smoking marijuana all day, every day, or just sitting back and drinking with people who I thought were my friends. I ended up getting into one relationship that really wasn't healthy. This kind of stems back from when I was molested. I just kind of was looking for a place or somebody to fill that void of the innocence that I had lost at a young age. I became very promiscuous, as most people would say. And it's not something I was very proud of. So, because of what I was doing, I was also trying to cover up and fill that void by using the drugs and alcohol. And looking back now, I can see how God was protecting me then. Because there were many nights where I drove under the influence of something. Couldn't remember how I got to a place, or I'm really surprised I didn't end up in jail, I didn't kill anybody, or that something bad didn't happen to me. You hear about it now where girls are taken advantage of. And so living that lifestyle, it woke me up a little bit. When I would go home and I would see my dad, he would make sure that he would catch me at the right time because I was always trying to avoid them. He would make it a point to come home and speak to me and tell me, Shannon, you're living in sin. You know this is not how you're supposed to live. You accepted Christ as your Lord and Savior, and this is not what He wants for you. And it would be on those days where I would do the, teenage eye roll. Okay, Dad, I gotcha. I would leave the house, and for whatever reason, those words would stick with me throughout the entire night. And those were the nights where I didn't party as much because I had that guilty conscience. Around this time, I met Ryan, who is my husband now. I was introduced to him through a mutual friend. And from the day I was introduced to him, we hit it off. We became instant best friends. And he saw the life that I was living. And he tried to get me to get away from the crowd that I was running with. And he would talk me out of certain situations where drugs were involved and tell me I didn't need to do it. So he would take me in another direction. We spent every day together, and he literally became my safe person. About a year or so after I met him, I got into another relationship. Very toxic. I knew from the get-go that it was a relationship I shouldn't have been in, but because of the availability for drugs, it enticed me more to pursue it. It only took a couple of months, and I started to notice how controlling this person was. He would verbally and emotionally abuse me. And once that started, it didn't take long for the physical abuse to start. I broke down. And the so-called friends that I had, I looked towards them to try and help me escape. And the friends that I thought I had, they were the ones that turned their backs on me at that time. So I was pretty much stuck with nobody. The guy I was dating at the time would literally control where I went, who I was around. I had limited access to my parents and to, the few friends that I had. The very first time that the abuse got physical, I could remember going back to my parents' house. And the look on my mom's face when I snuck in and she saw me with the bruises all over me. I will never forget that. Just knowing the pain that she went through, seeing her only daughter suffer through something so horrible and not being able to control the situation. I couldn't imagine. After hearing several people tell me I needed to leave the relationship that I was in, including his family telling me I needed to leave, there was something about it that I just couldn't. For one, I know it was fear because he had total control over me. And then two, it was, obviously the drugs. As time went on, the abuse got worse. And I was exposed to numerous things that I would not wish upon anybody. Drug dealing, drug manufacturing. At some point, I even had a hand in selling a little bit here and there. But knowing that if the guy I was with did not get his next high, I knew I was going to get abused. I knew it. Tiptoeing through the house, literally walking on eggshells. It does a number on a person. I could remember sitting in our recliner and looking out the window like a lost little kid, asking God, why do I have to go through this? What have I done to deserve this? And there were times where we would fight and I would take off. And I would always find myself at my parents' church. And I can remember one time walking up to the door, not expecting it to be unlocked. And it was. Nobody was around. It was just time for me to be alone with God. I went in and I prayed. Just help me get out of this situation. Whatever it takes. I became so depressed that I started cutting. and I started to use heavier drugs. Started using crystal meth. And growing up, I never would have imagined that I would fall into this lifestyle. And there was one night in particular that I did this, and I remember my mom and my dad coming to me as I laid on their couch just sobbing, and they both prayed over me. And when they prayed over me, I felt something different. For the first time in 2 years, I felt strength, and I didn't know where it was coming from. The guy I was with, he was gone. And something told me to leave. And when I did, I never turned back. And I can remember feeling a big weight being lifted off of me. Ryan actually came back into my life. He showed up at the place that I was working at. And I have never been so excited to see a person in my entire life. After a year of not seeing Ryan, when I finally did see him, I literally bolted out the door and jumped in his arms and asked him to never leave me again. We were inseparable once again. And I was still struggling with the crystal meth, and he told me that he did not want me to use it anymore. I had no reason to use it. So once we moved down here, I got sober. We ended up having Maddox, my pride and my joy. Honestly, Maddox plays a big role in my walk with Christ. Only because of the struggles that I've been through, I want better for him. And he teaches me every day that no matter what I'm going through, I am loved by God. He tells me this every day. So, on August of 2013, after years of being a sinner, living in the world, falling to temptation, I decided to give my life back to Christ. And from that day on, it has been nothing but good. The changes that I've made in my life, obviously, have been for the better. And I can honestly look back now and say that God was working on me from the very beginning. I am Shannon Humphrey, and His grace is enough.